Crystal Stokes here with Get Stoked, a podcast with real and raw conversations with leaders of all types, business owners, managers, executives, and more. Get stoked by their honest and insightful stories and key takeaways that you can use to improve your leadership abilities. Now, if you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe and share it with others. Your support and feedback really makes a difference. Now, without further ado, let's dive in. Hey, everybody, Crystal here, and I'm with Ron Sosa. And Ron, let me just go ahead and have you introduce yourself. Tell the world, who are you and why are we here?
Oh, gosh. So, I mean, that's a big ask, right? And so anybody who knows me knows I hate talking about myself. So it's the one thing I dread doing. But I'm Ron Sosa. I have been in the veterinary industry, or profession, as I like to call it, for the last 20 years. In fact, next month hits my 20-year anniversary. I started off not realizing this is what I wanted to do and fell into it. After becoming, sitting at the front desk and being on the job trained vet assistant, to managing practices and in multiple locations and different pet businesses outside of just the veterinary. Now I am in a smaller corporation that is in learning and development, and I'll be moving on into a consulting and media firm pretty soon. So that's an exciting change for me. And that's a little bit about who I am. I hold a couple certifications in my background, the biggest one being the Certified Veterinary Practice Manager. And there's a couple other small ones that I've done.
Mm-hmm. And we've talked a little bit offline, and I know that you are one of those people that's very gifted in systems and seeing systems, building systems. You have a brain that works that way.
Yeah, I've got a brain that's like conflicting in itself, right? I've got the one side of my brain, it's like systemize, but let's overprocess everything because I need routine. And the other side of my brain is like, but let's try something new and what's different? How can I break this and put it together again? And so, yeah, it's a fun world in my brain.
Oh, it sounds fun. I'm imagining a Rubik's Cube where it's like, let's make it a mess, but then let's put it back together.
Well, it's like, we're going to start off as a cube, but then let's try being a circle or, a sphere, or like, let's try being an octagon today.
So, when we met, we had a commonality and passions around the mental health scene. And what we decided to focus in on today for this podcast episode is neurodiversity, particularly in the veterinary profession. And I'd love to hear how this became something of interest to you. And if you can share any stories with us about your experience with neurodiversity and also in the field of, in the profession of veterinary medicine.
Yeah, so it's kind of an odd world. You just get placed in the middle of something and then figure it out. But I will say that I was late diagnosed as ADHD in my early 30s. I think I might have been 30 when it happened. And that kind of led me into this world of like, what does that mean? I thought it was just these kids that bounce off all four walls. I didn't know adults have ADHD. Like, I didn't know this was a thing. Mm-hmm. And so you start to like learn about all of these behaviors and, quote unquote disorders that surround ADHD. And I realized like the whole, like half of the universe just opens up. And it's like, finally understand yourself as not like the weird kid. It's like, oh, this is, actually because my brain functions this way. And I'll say that it happened when I went into practice management, needing to be really organized and going, getting like this frustration level over and over and over again. I'm like, I'm not this frustrated person. Mm-hmm. I want to be the manager I never had. And so why am I being the manager I always had? And so that was a really big wake up call for me to go. In fact, my husband said it was like, marriage counseling for anger management. What turns out to be anger management turned into like your diagnosis for ADHD, and then realizing, wow, that low threshold for frustration is actually caused by a whole different thing. And let's figure out how to actually work with my brain so that I can accomplish what I want to accomplish. And so that led me down to this giant world of neurodiversity. And in investigating that and doing some work through the pandemic, mental health suffered, right? For a lot of us. The veterinary industry is plagued with mental health problems. It's plagued with suicides at a higher rate than most other professions. And so I went back to my psychiatrist and told him I was struggling. And I'll never forget the day where he was just like, are you ready for more information? And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I'm a type of person that throw the kitchen sink at the problem. So let's do this. Like, what are you talking about? And he gave me an initial. Now, I can't an initial diagnosis of autism. And so I don't know what that means quite yet. Still investigating that because I wanted to prove him wrong. I'm like, you're a quack. There's no way. But I've gone down this thing where it's really hard to get an adult diagnosis. And if you do, it takes years and years and years. So I'm in that process. But in that process, being able to investigate and really open up the other side of the universe for me, and it's like really understand who I am, and then how can I use this to help other professionals in our profession that are probably struggling with their neurodiversity, whether they know it or not. And like all of these management processes that we put in place are actually working against us. So that's kind of where this path led for me.
Okay, I want to hear more about that. So when you think about the current system that exists, because this is the thing when it comes to systems, and for us that love systems, they, by their nature, especially when they're initially being built, tend to be exclusionary. Like it's built for simplicity, and let's take the average, the people under the bell curve that fit in that middle hump. Let's focus on them and getting them what they need. But the people that may be diverse on the tail ends do not necessarily get what they need. And I would love to see if you could speak to someone who may be an outlier on either side of that bell curve that may be feeling like they're really struggling. You can describe what it was like for you or what you've seen with other people. And let's start there with the pain points and challenges people are facing.
Yeah, I think not necessarily my experience, but in doing a lot of investigation and working with my teams that have admitted to me they're neurodiverse, whatever their alphabet soup is, because that's just a whole nother alphabet soup than letters behind your name. But I remember a story. I have this technician, and she was an amazing tech, right? She'd go into these rooms and spend like 20, 25 minutes in the room for a 30-minute appointment. And doctors are so frustrated. It's like, get in and get out, get in and get out. And what I've come to realize is there's something called time blindness, right? With some of these neurodiverse processes, we don't know what the value of a minute is. And maybe our value of a minute is 20 seconds right now because we're really interested, but maybe the value of a minute is like 2.5 minutes for something we're less interested in, right? And so what I've realized is those teammates that you're dealing with that are so frustrating because they can't get out of a room don't actually realize how much time they're spending in that room, right? And so what can we do to help them help themselves and their team to speed it up when they're having this time blindness going on? And so I think that was, for me, a big story that I was like, wow, I can resonate with that a little bit. I think some of us are a little bit better at masking or, putting on that barrier. Okay, I'm not going to wear that label today, so I'm going to do the exact opposite. So you run in and run out, and maybe you're less personable. But that's better than being yelled at all the time for being taking too long in an exam room. So I just remember that story was so powerful for me, because when we built some systems for her specifically, like, hey, let's have you wear, like one of those Fitbit watches, and you set it for 10 minutes. Every time you walk in the room, you just tap it. And, she felt proud of herself when she was able to perform with the team rather than constantly being like, feeling like a failure because she couldn't do what was asked her to do because she just couldn't figure out how to do it on her own.
That story, it definitely lands in my heart of how can we support people? Because at the end of the day, the vast majority of people working in the veterinary profession want to do a great job. They want to be a part of the team. They want to perform well. And so if they're underperforming, we need to really wonder what's going on there. How can we support their performance in a way that truly works for them? My background and specialization as a therapist is in anxiety disorders and trauma. And something that I've seen over and over again in various professional settings is difficult employees that may come across as somewhat aggressive or snippy, actually having very high levels of anxiety, or maybe an undiagnosed trauma disorder where their nervous system is just on, like they're like a live wire, and they just feel on edge. They got the adrenaline pumping, the cortisol pumping in their system. And to work with someone like that and to help them understand what's going on in their biology and how to work with their system to bring their system down a few levels, to feel calmer, to feel more confident, to work with anxiety or to work with their, anything that may be triggering them. And then all of a sudden their affect completely changes. And now that they're much more grounded, they're confident, they're easier to work with. They don't feel like they're on edge all the time. They feel supported by their team. Like these sort of things don't have to be so complicated, but I do get the sense that there's just not much attention or awareness around what's happening for these individuals.
Yeah, I think that and myself included, right? I said I went back into another closet when I, hit about autism, right? Because I'm like, this is not me. There's a lot of shame and misunderstanding around it. And so you get two sides of the spectrum. You get people that are like, oh, and they look at you funny when you tell them. And then you get the other person, well, you don't look that way. You don't act that way. And it's like, it's because we have no idea what that way looks like, right? The conversations around some of these neurodiverse, traumas, and I know they can look very similar, is we don't normalize it enough. Like we don't normalize our mental health because we're taught from a very early age in school that you just grind and grind and grind to get the work done. And not everybody's brain works that way. Mm-hmm. And I tell you, maybe this is probably shifting the conversation a little bit, but I'm very thankful to the millennial and the Gen Z. Thank you for bringing a work-life balance, and thank you for relieving us of these, pressures and mental health problems that we suppressed for so long. Sure, is it a plague now, and we're trying to recognize and realize what's out there? But at least it's being talked about, right? And so now we can address it earlier and earlier in our younger generations.
Oh yeah, I definitely am all about, I keep thinking of something that comes up a lot for me when I work with families, and the idea of walking on eggshells and sweeping shells under the rug. Like we're not talking about it. You can feel something's wrong, but we're not really talking about it in a direct, descriptive way. And I like to talk about, let's get all the rugs out of the house. There's nowhere to sweep anything anymore. Let's just have it out and have discussions about what's happening. And I think that mental health in the veterinary profession is growing. There's been more and more talk about burnout, compassion fatigue, increased levels of suicide. So we are starting to talk about it. What I like about our conversation, and the reason I wanted to bring you on for the podcast, is that I think that you are talking about something even more granular, things that are a little more subtle. Burnout and suicide are very easy to see right now. You can walk in, you can feel that people are exhausted and taxed and barely hanging on. When there's a suicide, it gets media attention. But when it comes to something like someone suffering with ADHD, maybe not knowing it, or maybe they're somewhere on the autism spectrum, they're just not aware, because again, getting a later life diagnosis is very difficult, or they have an anxiety disorder they didn't even know they had. I look back on my life in my 20s, I would say I did have an anxiety disorder. I had no idea. I just thought I was stressed. I'm just stressed. I'm really busy. I'm really stressed. But if I look back on it, I'd say, but my reaction to stress was really exaggerated. Why was I feeling so stressed? And that had to do more with how I was processing and anticipating the future. Anyway, I digress. I feel like this conversation is extremely important, that it is somewhat granular and it talks about the more specific issues that fly under the radar.
Yeah, I think for me, sensory issues were such a big thing in my life, and I didn't realize how sensory issues actually affected me until I understood it, or until I really read into it. I have this story where when I was a kid, my parents, we lived in a very humble household. We didn't have much, right? My parents did the best they could. My father was disabled. My stepmom worked, as much as she could. She didn't have a degree. She wasn't educated. So we got by. But they bought these socks, and I'll never forget it. It's like I can feel them today. But we got these socks, or the crease or the seam was like in the toenail, like across here rather than over the knuckle. And I swear I equate it to like my soul being scraped against a cheese grater. But the label that happened, right, is that, oh, I'm just being dramatic. And you get these labels early in your life that you're being dramatic and you're always late, and you're too much, or too much of a handful. You talk too much. And all of a sudden it's like you put these masks on to be able to fit into the world. And then we wonder why we have this anxiety, is because we're not even who we are. For a long time, like for instance, I put on so many layers of masks and I just didn't even know who I was and what I wanted, because for so long I was rewarded for doing for others that I just had no idea what I wanted for myself. And it isn't until like the last 2 years that I've been able to ask myself what I want and being able to peel across those masks and be like, what is it? Who am I and what do I want? And being able to answer that question is so satisfying. And there's like, life is rewarding again without just being producing for someone else. So.
Oh, it's such a good point. And imagine being able to do that even in a professional sense, to say, I'm coming into this building every day, day in and day out. What do I want from it aside from a paycheck and that security? Why am I here doing this day in and day out? And I think when we answer that question, we start to tap into something really deep and really important. And I also see people generating interesting solutions from that place, because naturally when we ask it, we'll say some things about the current position are working and some aren't.
Yeah.
So with those things that aren't working so well, now that you're aligned with what's true for you and what you want, what are some possible solutions here? You know, it's a powerful position to be in when you truly are aware of who you are and why you're here.
Yeah. And I would say it wasn't until, I got my diagnosis that I was able to like peel back those layers and figure that out. And I feel like in some ways I'm still figuring out who I am and what I want to do with my life, right? I would say when I grow up, I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up. But I have a much clearer vision of what that looks like now than I ever had my entire life. I was thinking myself stuck at 18 years old, going to college, going, I have no idea what I want to do with my life, right? Like, and you're not supposed to at 18, but at 30 something, you should have an idea what you want to do. I feel like I've just been following this thing that I'm obsessed with, which is veterinary profession. Like, and I'm very thankful that my special interest is also my career now. Like I get to choose that as my career rather than just being stuck in it and doing something I'm okay and good at.
I know it is so wonderful that you have that alignment. I want to ask I'm thinking about people who may be listening that may be wondering, like, how would I know if I have ADHD, or how would I know if I may be on the autism spectrum? And now I would preface this by saying your experiences may not be somebody else's, but
Absolutely.
Would you mind sharing personally some of the signs or symptoms that you had? Let's just start with maybe autism that you didn't know it were, had anything to do with autism, but now you do know. And then we could also do the same for ADHD.
It's funny. I had a hole in my eardrum since I was in my early 20s, right? We had rough housing in the pool, broke my eardrum. Normally they grow back. And so it never grew back. And I remember back then the doctor being like, it's not broke, don't fix it. There's no reason to do it. You could, risk more hearing loss if you fix it. So just leave it alone. Unless you're getting recurring ear infections, don't worry about it. And then a couple of years ago, I started to get recurring ear infections. Like, all right, I actually have to do something about this. I go to the doctor. And I kept telling him, like, I'm really sensitive to sound, all of it. Like, I just, I get into a Home Depot that was really crowded, and this was pre-COVID, but it was really crowded. And I just had like this panic attack. And I'm like, I don't get panic attacks. Why am I having a panic attack? I look at it now going, that was so much sensory that, it was in the fan aisle and the lights are blinking and the fans are going. And it was super packed. And I want to say it was maybe around like Black Friday. It wasn't exactly Black Friday, but it was right around there. And, looking back now, I go like, I was just in sensory overwhelm. But it's something I didn't understand until I got my diagnosis, right? Mm-hmm. So now I get to look at my life backwards and realize a lot of things like that sock thing and being able to have these breakdowns. And I getting in trouble at Thanksgiving every single year for gagging on stuffing because I can't stand the texture in my mouth, but I love the taste. Like that, it's like this dichotomy of doesn't make sense. And then my parents going like, what, you just don't like my cookie? I'm like, I swear, it's like, and just, I gag, I don't get it. And it's just these sensory issues, I think, became really real for me once I got that diagnosis going, oh my gosh, I actually understand why the tag bothers me so much. Like, I need tagless shirts.
Yes. So that's a hallmark, right? So everybody listening, ding, 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 sensory, your five senses, right? Sight, smell, touch, feel, sound, taste, those, having a very acute awareness around all the senses and becoming overstimulated. So too much light is coming in, too many colors, too many patterns, there's too much sound. So having a way to have some control over those inputs to help your system regulate.
Yeah. Funny story. So me and my husband will get a mattress every 5 or so years, right? And he likes a firm mattress. I like the plush. Like, I'm like, give me the softest thing possible. I want to fall and dive into it. And we go to the mattress store, and it's finally my turn to get a mattress. And I go in, I'm like, I want the softest mattress you have in the place. And he goes, yeah, I mean, everybody says that, and then they go for that one. So I'm like, no. I will pick the softest mattress. Like, I promise you. And I don't know today if it was his sales technique or not, but he was like, if you can pick the softest mattress by whatever they grade them on, I'll give you a couple $100 off. So I was like, you got a deal. Well, turns out like I sit on like 7 or 8 different mattresses, and I supposedly picked out the most softest mattress, but I never forget that. I was like, a win. I got my softest mattress, and I'm super happy at night, and I could sleep better. Again, I don't know if it was a sales technique, which would have been really good if it was, but I just felt like I was the princess and the pea in that moment, right? Like, I could feel like the subtle differences between, how plush a mattress was.
Right. And that's where all these things that may be a challenge can also be a superpower, just high acuity. How about on the ADHD side? Can you talk more about that one? Because I find that topic is really interesting also for women, that many women don't get diagnosed because they're not the hyperactive part may not be as visible based on how we're conditioned. So how did that present for you, the ADHD, and like what challenges were you experiencing that were related to ADHD?
Yeah, I think I was the stereotypical boy that was like, as they say, bouncing off of all 4 walls, couldn't sit still, and then going into like a fixture part of the furniture, like bouncing off all 4 walls and then complete crash for like a day or two, and then bounce off, and repeat over and over in the cycle. Looking back, I remember my parents saying at a very young age, everybody's ADHD now. They're just handling out Ritalin to everyone. And so I think it was a matter of my house not being accepting to what was possible or what that meant, and just being very hypersensitive to like, doctors just over prescribing medication. And so, but yeah, you're right. In my research, like, a lot of it has to do with like gender roles in society and how women are supposed to be like much more proper and, well controlled of their body and their situation. And so I think that's the mask that women wear in a very early age, is how to learn how to control their energy very, very young. And so they're not the hyperactive. But what I learned is it's the talkative ones, right? So the ones that can't shush, and I was this kid too, but had the desk right by the teacher's desk because couldn't stop talking no matter who was around you. So you had to be separated across the room. Like, that's how it looks like, from my understanding, that's how it looks like in young girls. Of course, there's other signs that I'm probably skipping over, but I know that's like the biggest one. Mm-hmm. For boys' energy, and it's girls, like their energy is through their, talking so much.
Did you ever have trouble, even in your adult years, with just staying organized and staying on task? Was that difficult for you?
Yeah, I would say that, learning who I am now, like, I think you and I had talked about this before, is like, there's 2 parts of my brain, right? The part is like, wants a system for everything. And that's probably like the autism side. Like, I need a system and I need routine. The other side of my brain is like, well, let's mix it up and try something new. And it's like, who's going to win today, or who's going to win in the moment? I don't really know. But yeah, I realize I have a lot of routines that I built into my day. Like, I have to do certain things in an order, or I get frustrated. Like, planning a trip is really, really hard because it has to be done a certain way. And I love spontaneity, but in a trip planning, I cannot handle spontaneity. And so it's really interesting. I would say in my career, I was the guy with the Post-it, and like every minor task had to be checked off and written down and checked off. And I remember I had this desk, and there was Post-its like falling to the ground, like stacked together like a ladder, just to like know what I was working on and what I needed to get done. And now in the virtual age, I have Trello, which has been my best friend.
Yes.
Like, being able to visually see, and I think that for me with my ADHD is that visualization of what's going on. Mm-hmm. To visually see stuff being checked off and completed is what drives that dopamine to go further, and that momentum to drive the project through.
You nailed it. Yeah, because ADHD and dopamine, it's all about the dopamine. And I love Trello too. Trello, for those that are listening, Google it. It is a software that is sort of like almost like your virtual sticky note whiteboard. You can organize things with colors, and it's fabulous. Let me ask you this before time slips by too quickly. for those listening, I'm thinking, let's say it's a practice manager, owner of a hospital. They may be thinking, there may be people on my team that could be experiencing these things. Maybe somebody has anxiety, maybe there's ADHD, maybe some other type of mental health challenge happening right now. How can I support them? Where do I start? Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I think this question actually comes up quite a bit when I talk to many practice managers throughout the country. It's where do I start? And I think that where we have to start is treating people like individuals, right? Instead of having this system of this is how we do things, I think we need to go and like, how can I support you as an individual in the hospital, right? Sure, we can have a system of like the process to interview, but we can also treat people like an individual in that process.
Yep. I agree 100%.
And I think once you create that culture of individualization, like I'm going to treat you like an individual, I think that creates that psychological safety for the team to talk about what their struggles are, knowing that they're not going to be shamed and you're actually going to give them an accommodation for what they're seeking. I think that's really powerful.
Agree completely. One of my favorite parts of the process when I start working with a new team, I love the initial phase of, I call it diagnostics. I'm here to meet everybody, to do surveys, to have individual interviews. I want to understand each person as a unique organism and how that contributes to the whole organism of this, company. And that process, really getting to meet each person, again, any kind of survey or data that I want to collect to really understand the bigger picture is so informative. And that alone, like sharing what I find during that diagnostic period, the discovery period with leadership, often right there, that alone creates aha moments of how to understand each of your team members better. And for me, I'm always about developing more compassion, that once we understand that, you feel compassion for another person when you can see them and what they're experiencing on an individual level. I do think that is such a key element as a starting point.
Yeah, I think there's one, I haven't figured out how to perfect this, but I know interviews are huge, right? Like, it's a talent pool problem out there now. Unemployment's at an all-time low, and it's really hard to retain. In the veterinary industry, or the profession is really struggling with talent retention and talent acquisition. And so to me, it's also like, how do I determine in an interview who the right candidate is if they don't necessarily behave the way I think they want to behave, right? So we're taught that it's professional to look someone in the eyes. Well, it's really uncomfortable as an autistic person to look someone in the eyes. And if you don't have a really good, strong mask, like you can get pulled away from that interview and not be a good candidate just because of that one thing. You don't trust anything else they're saying, right? So these instinctual or like these learned biases that we need to kind of deconstruct. And again, like we said earlier, just really treat the individual like the individual. The company I work with, they talk about like, keeping your 8s, 9s, and 10s and getting rid of your 1s, 2s, and 3s. And I think the premise is wonderful, right? We don't want to have the low performers in our hospital. We really want to hold on and cherish the high performers that, and because there's a place for everyone. A 1, 2, and 3 could be an 8, 9, 10 somewhere else. And maybe that's the best thing for them. But how do I recognize that the 1, 2, 3 isn't a 1, 2, 3 because of the process I put in place in my hospital? Right? And how do I know about making a couple tweaks, they can become a 5, 6, 7 or an 8, 9, 10, right? And some of those tweaks, I think are really necessary. Like that individualized, like with the people makes more sense to me to figure out like who is an 8, 9, 10.
I love this. So in the spirit of thinking about things that help people perform better, feel better, how about for you? Do you have any little routines or habits that you do on a regular basis that really help you feel your best?
I have learned, after many years of failing at this, I have learned to put blocks in my calendar to like have thinking time, right? And I don't feel guilty about it, right? I have a 2-hour block that it's like, if I sit here and do absolutely nothing productively, that's okay because I had time to like actually think about what it is I'm working on and how to move further, because that is actually productive even if you can't measure it. But I'd say like that for me has been the biggest, the game-changing thing for my work life.
Oh, I want to like clip this out and just put it all over the internet for people to read. I think it's so important. I call it, for me, reverse calendaring, where normally we fill our calendar with everything we have to do. Yeah. And then if there's any room left, we might squeeze in the things that actually are enjoyable or helpful.
Yeah.
What if we did the calendar backwards, you know?
The whole analogy with the glass of water and then the sand and then the big rocks don't fit. But if you do it in reverse, right? You put the big rocks in first and then the sand and then everything fits, right?
Yes.
We do a terrible job in leadership, I think probably across the board, about planning, right? And the whole adage is that we fail to plan, then we plan to fail, right? And so I think that's so true, and that resonated with me. And being part of the uncharted veterinary community really helped me place some boundaries on being able to put that in place and not feel so guilty about it. And it's really changed my world as a manager and being able to be a better leader for my people.
I think that's a huge point for all veterinary professionals and wherever they are in the industry. Put your oxygen mask on first. It's okay to take care of you. In fact, it's a requirement for you to do the best work you can in serving whoever it is that you're serving. You have to be in your best form. You deserve it.
And let's show up with that and not criticize that, but really promote it.
Hear, hear. And by the way, our guest here is Hexie.
Aww.
She is about a 15-year-old semi-blind tortie. She's my little fur baby, one of 3. And I'm glad that she joined us today. She always wants her cuddles. Throughout the day. So she's joining us for the podcast. And what I'd like to do now in wrapping up is for those listening who may want to connect with you that have their own experiences, they may have questions about, neurodiversity or how to make their workplace more inclusive, and they may want to get in touch with you. What's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, I am hopefully building out a platform for that to happen. But in the meantime, I can be found on LinkedIn and my profile. And that's how you and I found each other, was LinkedIn. And feel free to message me. I'm extremely open to messages and collaboration. I found of several people I've worked with so far, and it's been an amazing collaboration that way. So thank you, LinkedIn, for that.
I know LinkedIn is how we met. So I will put that in the show notes for anybody who wants to connect. They'll find the link there. And Ron, it has been such a pleasure to talk with you today about this important topic. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you bringing light to this.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining me today. I hope that you feel stoked after listening to this episode. And as always, I would love to hear your comments and feedback. Is there a topic that you want to know more about? Please let me know. And thank you again for subscribing and sharing your favorite episodes with others. It really means a lot.